What is going on, everyone? It's me, and welcome back to another episode of Creepypastas Explained, where we look at the disturbing origins of scary stories that have circulated the internet and continue to persist even after their creators have attempted to debunk or walk back their creation. But before we can begin, let's take a look at this image here. Just a quick flash warning for those who are sensitive to flashing lights. Now let's just all collectively take a moment of silence for whoever was unfortunate enough to have this image burned into their retinas. Alright, now let's talk about it. So I doubt I need to explain who Jeff the Killer is at this point. Even if you aren't familiar with the story, chances are you've seen this photo. If you haven't, well, get ready for a treat because he's gonna haunt your nightmares forever now. The story of Jeff the Killer first appeared on 4chan's itch board back in 2008, a time when creepypasta was still in its infancy, but sites like Reddit were starting to become popular. As such, many early pastas are characterized by a sense of amateurishness, not only in their writing, but also in how they were uploaded to the internet. This was certainly true of Jeff, whose first uploads featured allegedly handwritten notes and photos taken from Google Images. But there was something about these images that really captured the imagination of internet users. Perhaps it was the grainy distortion that gave them an unsettling, almost alien quality, or maybe it was just that most people couldn't figure out who the hell this guy was. Whatever the reason, the few blurry pictures of Jeff's face that were posted on 4chan back in 2008 quickly spread across the internet and recontextualized on various social media platforms. It's hard to say exactly why this happened, but since Jeff's earliest iterations were pretty damn horrifying, being shared around only made the pasta more popular. Like some sort of digital virus, it infected anyone who laid eyes on it and compelled them to spread it to others. And this remains true to this day. After all, you wouldn't be watching this video if you weren't already infected, huh? Anyway, before we move on to the meat of the video, I want to make it clear that there are actually multiple versions of Jeff's backstory, which only adds to the mystery surrounding him. However, most of them follow the same basic premise. Jeffrey, a nerdy kid with an abusive father, is relentlessly bullied at school one day. He retaliates against his tormentors and is punished by having his head bleached by his gym teacher, who is either malevolent or incompetent. Anyway, Jeffrey then goes home and carves a smile into his own face, killing his family in the process. From that point forward, he becomes known as Jeff the Killer. Of course, it's worth mentioning that over-the-top horror details are usually a sign of amateurish writing, especially during creepypasta's early days. But again, it's precisely this kind of stuff that made Jeff stand out and ensured he became an instant classic. For whatever reason, the idea of a bully-turned-serial killer who scalds himself with bleach and then cuts his face into a smile was far more memorable than anything else circulating the internet at the time. In fact, it may have been the first pasta that I ever heard of that didn't feature Slender Man. It's unclear exactly what inspired creator Cesar to come up with Jeff, but it probably didn't take much. After all, the character himself is a personification of bullying, a wrathful spirit born of relentless mockery and cruel punishments. That's the implication, at least. Because if you look beyond the bloody disfigurement and the over-the-top violence, the core of Jeff's story is nothing new. We've seen stories about bullied kids turning on their tormentors since the beginning of recorded history. In modern times, however, there's usually a heavy dose of irony present in these tales, as if to remind us that no matter how powerful a bully may seem, they always remain human and are thus susceptible to humiliating situations. This element is somewhat lacking in Jeff's story. Instead, there's a sense of inevitability to the bloodshed, a foregone conclusion that things will inevitably turn violent. This could be interpreted as a commentary on how schools often fail to protect their students from bullies, leaving them to fend for themselves. However, that's just my opinion. And as far as I know, there's no evidence to support this reading of the story. Anyway, moving on to the photo itself, there are a lot of conflicting theories as to who's in the original image. Most people agree that the guy in question is a young man named Ryan, who apparently dated Alex, the author of the original post. However, there's very little evidence to support this claim. There's a blurry picture floating around out there that supposedly shows Ryan and Alex together, but it looks less like a photograph and more like two stick figures that someone drew on Microsoft Paint. I tried looking for higher resolution versions, but they don't seem to exist, so I'm afraid we'll never know for sure. As for the image itself, it's widely believed that it was taken sometime between 2005 and 2008. If that's true, it makes sense that the photo would be of poor quality considering that cameras weren't as advanced back then. Also, remember that the story started on 4chan, an image board notorious for low-quality posts. In fact, it was uncommon for 4chan users to distort images for the sole purpose of making them more grotesque. Given that this seems to have been the case with Jeff's photo, it's likely why it has such a haunting, unsettling feel to it today. Nowadays, though, people tend to favor a more modern aesthetic. So many have recreated the image using modern filters such as glitch effects and chromatic aberration. Some have even changed the subject entirely, placing Jeff's face on top of famous people. Of course, these newer edits are meant to be funny rather than creepy, although I think they also effectively demonstrate the uncanny valley effect that Jeff's face has on people. It's difficult to articulate precisely why this is, but something about his eyes and smile is off-putting. Maybe it's the unnatural spacing between his teeth or the dark bags under his eyes. Whatever the reason, looking at his face makes people feel deeply unsettled. And it's this reaction that has ensured his longevity as a horror icon. After all, what's more terrifying than a photo that can literally burn itself into your mind? But perhaps the creepiest thing about Jeff the Killer is how it blurs the line between fiction and reality. Since the character's inception, thousands upon thousands of Jeff the Killer fan fiction and art have been created. But the trend didn't stop there. In 2010, a series of articles began to circulate the internet claiming that a boy had been arrested in his hometown of Toledo, Ohio, for murdering his parents and carving a smile into his face. Although this sounds exactly like the plot of the Jeff the Killer story, police officials quickly confirmed that it was nothing more than a hoax. Still, similar stories have continued to surface over the years, and it's easy to understand why. After all, the idea of a killer stalking your local playground, ready to strike at any moment, is a frightening one. Thus, there's no shortage of people willing to perpetuate the myth. In recent years, the story of Jeff the Killer has been recycled and repackaged countless times. You may have even seen one of these videos yourself. I know I have. Usually they follow the same basic format, beginning with the words, "This is one of the scariest things I've ever experienced," before proceeding to tell a story about how the narrator came across Jeff's photo and was subsequently murdered or driven insane. Obviously, these are just horror stories written for internet clout. But again, it's important to recognize just how effective a simple image can be. Some might argue that Jeff the Killer is nothing more than a modern-day boogeyman, a monster that lives in the darkest corners of our minds and feeds on our collective anxiety. And maybe they'd be right. After all, the appeal of stories like this is that they tap into primal fears that have existed long before we develop language or the ability to comprehend abstract concepts. In Jeff's case, it's the fear of the unknown, the sense of dread that accompanies a photograph you can't quite place, a feeling you can't quite put into words. It's the fear of stumbling upon something you weren't supposed to see, of witnessing a horror so profound it defies rational explanation. It's the fear that once you've seen Jeff's face, you can never truly escape it, that it will forever be burned into the back of your eyelids, mocking you, as you struggle to comprehend the abyss staring back at you, but I want to leave you with a final question. Let's say you woke up one night and at the end of your bed, you saw Jeff standing there staring at you. What would you do? That's all I have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always, have a great day.